For this first video, I want to talk about how to prepare your space for working at home. Make sure you get a piece of canvas, or if the kid has a piece of canvas, it'll probably be 1 foot by 2 foot. This is bigger, but I want to show you the type of canvas you want to use. And this is the type of canvas surface that I use at home to work when I'm working in a space that I need to put the space together for work, then clean up and put it all away because I have 2 kids that will decide to work on my projects for me. Okay, so you can decide on, we're going to give you one size of material most likely. Though if you need more, you can get this at any of the arts and crafts stores. Even Walmart carries duck cloth canvas like this. So it's real sturdy. If you don't have anything like that, you can also work off of different materials. Just make sure it's materials that the clay doesn't stick too heavily. And you'll probably see me do, through the semester, you're going to see me work with clay on different surfaces that aren't considered normal surfaces. So I use whatever I have access to wherever I go for clay, because you never know what you're going to have in different locations around the country or around the world when you work with this material. Or even you might have to go get clay from the backyard. Now, in the first day syllabus and handout, we have already talked about the different tools that you need. So hopefully you have collected your fork, you've got an acetylene knife or another cutting tool, and a brush of some sort, and you hopefully have broken down some clay, the same clay that you're working with, into slip, where you've dried out the clay, and once it was dry, put it in a container with hot water to break down. So now it's a painting material. And that's what we're going to use for what we're going to do today with slipping and scoring as we introduce hand building into your class for Ceramics 1. And you should have in your toolkit, it won't look as fancy as this one, but you'll have a basic cutoff wire. Now let's say you didn't get the toolkit, you can also use a piece of nylon wire, or you can use a piece of fishing line and just tie it to 2 corks. So there's lots of different ways to make tools also, and I'm going to be doing some video stuff or live videos also. We'll be talking about making some tools, specifically carving tools later. And I usually use a stick of some kind, just like this, but you can get, I always joke, you can get a popsicle stick and a piece of sandpaper, and then you can sand this down or shape it any way you want. This is actually a tool that's been purchased this way that has a spoon end. It's just a tool I grabbed for this demo. When you go to Marjan's or other locations and you got your clay from that you need for this, which is your cone 910 stoneware, when it comes brand new, it will come in a bag like this. You can see this one's a lot shorter because I've already worked on it. So, but when it's brand new, this clay that you purchase has already been pre-screened, pre-mixed, and prepared for you. So what that means is it's a lot easier to work with than clay that you find in nature. And it is a blend of multiple clays a lot of times. Like this one's a dark brown. And when you get this, it's already been through a machine called a pug mill. So it's already been, the air's already been taken out of it. It's also been processed where all the particles are working in a line so you can work with this really quickly out of the bag. Now, if you do run into a bag of clay, let's say you go into the clay store and you bought a bag of clay and you're like, this is really, really hard on the outside. Like physically, you can see here, this isn't that hard because I can push in. But let's say it has a skin on it. Think of like an M&M. It has this hard shell on the outside, but the inside might be still really soft. What happens is this clay, as it sits at the store, will build a hard shell. The inside moisture will still be there. The outside will be hard because the moisture goes inward. So you want to take a wooden mallet, a stick. Actually at home I use a baseball bat. And you get to beat the clay or hit the clay. And as you pound it, this is actually an old method that I first learned about it in a book from about the 1930s. I had never seen the method in my classroom as a student. And you just hit the clay, and if it's not completely dried out, the moisture comes up and this softens it. It breaks those particles. It actually breaks it up. So you can actually now, this is more workable than it was when I first got it from the store. Now, when you open this, the first lesson we're going to do is just get an idea of the malleability of the material, the way it works with your hands, the way this material has been, through time, turned into this, so it's workable. And that's actually what's attracted people for thousands of years, is this material being malleable. If I went like this and there's my thumbprint, and I fired it, my thumbprint would still be there. That is one of the beauties of this material. The other beauty, of course, is you start working with it, it creates a shape and it'll stay in that shape. So what you're going to do is take your wire, cut a segment off. And the other important thing about this is, here's the clay I'm going to work with. The clay that's still in the bag that I'm not going to work with, you don't want to leave it out like this, especially in Arizona, because this will naturally dry even in your house as the AC moves air around, or if you're outside working, this is going to dry really quickly. So you want to take the bag, twist it on itself, and I always flip my clay upside down like this. That way the moisture is still there. If you look around me, the clay that I was preparing for other demos is covered in blue shop towel that's been wet to keep it wet while I work. You can also put a plastic bag over it versus a shop towel. So once you have this block of clay, then you're going to want to cut it in half. With these halves, you're going to take your hands and you're going to do what's called wedging. I usually put my hands together, and what I'm going to do is just bring the clay up, and it's the opposite of kneading. Kneading, you're putting air in. Wedging, you're pushing the air out. And what I'm actually doing by doing this is working the particles together, getting the material to be the same consistency for working. A lot of times I have a sponge that I have squeezed out near me, or a sink nearby, or a wet towel, and then I throw the towel in the washer as soon as I'm done. But normally it's a big sponge. It's a big square sponge. And what I do, the blue towels work too, as long as they're wet. I'll put my hands on there, because what happens is your hands are going to take the moisture out of the clay, and that will dry the clay out faster. Now what we're going to do is the same tradition that's been done in ceramic classrooms for a long, long time. I still teach this the first day. And you start out with a ball of clay. You stick your thumb into it, then your hand like this, and you start pinching. And this is the pinch method. Some of you, of course, the first day we talked about, one of the questions I asked was how much experience you have with the material. And most of you might have done this before in elementary, middle school, high school, even maybe another class that you took somewhere else, or community class. And what you're going to do is work on pinching with even pressure to start creating this bowl form, this negative form. And if you push really hard and then let up, and then push softer, then put really hard, you can get uneven walls. So this takes practice. One time I did an installation of over 300 pinch bowls, and I made them all in about 2 days. And I can tell you right now that after making about 300 of these, this part of my hand was really, really sore for about a week, because you got to work on learning building muscles in your hands for this type of work. All the clay disciplines, or the different things that we're going to do in clay, from the wheel to hand building to even sculpting, different things, they all take muscle and muscle memory. So the more you do this, the better these bowls are going to get. My first pinch bowls were pretty scary looking, because I did not understand the hand pressure thing. So my early ones were really uneven, because I would squeeze really hard, let up, squeeze really hard, let up. And that's the same thing as when we get towards the wheel. It's the same thing with the wheel. If you push really hard, then let up, push really hard, let up, almost like your hands are breathing, then you'll have uneven walls, and then you'll have problems, or you're going to have to figure out a creative solution. Now, you can see this bowl, the rim you want about 1/4 of an inch, and you want it to be balanced in your hands, like this. Now, earlier I already made a couple other ones, and you can see these are a little bit thicker than this one. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to working on these just to stretch it out a little bit more. And I'm going to stretch this one out. Now, I worked on these earlier, so they've actually built their own skeletal strength. They've built their own structure. They've gotten a little bit harder on the outside, so they're not as malleable as this one. This one, if I poke it, it will make a dent. This one, I poke it, it's a little bit harder. So, but it's still workable. So I'm still working from wet to, this one's more getting to what we call leather hard as a state. Now, This other piece is pretty much the same thing. We just repeat the process. And that's one thing about the arts and clay, or any other, clay especially, but most of the arts, you get better with repetition. I've taught other mediums such as drawing, and I've always had students who tell me they can't draw, but they signed up for a drawing class. But with repetition, you can get to rendering. You can make a drawing that looks like a drawing. So with repetition, you can get a bowl that looks like a bowl with practice. Now, if the rim starts getting uneven like this one, you can see how it's high and low valleys. I'm going to show you another trick to fix it. I tell people all around that I teach hand building or working with their hands is a sculpture is just one trick after another trick after another trick, and you end up with a finished product by solving all the problems or fixing all the little things that need to be fixed as you go. It's not all, my sculpture doesn't go from here to here instantly. I have to go each step of the way, and as I go up the steps, I adjust what I did before, and it all evens out. It all blend together. And we're going to do that with your first major hand building project is one that's going to take multiple sessions to build. So you're going to learn how you can deal with clay and learn timing of clay. Today, with this, we're just learning what this stuff feels like, what it's like. And one thing I really want to push and make you think about is how much people around the world have used this material to create objects. Now, of course, if I stopped here with this object, it's not done yet. It has to dry. After it's dried, we have to put it into a specialized process, which is a kiln, which is our firing material, and we have to fire it to make it permanent. If I don't like this, I let it dry all the way, and then I put it in a bucket of water, and it'll go back to being clay again. And then I can rework it. Once it's fired, though, that's where it becomes more permanent until somebody comes along, like a cat, and knocks it off the wall and onto the ground and shatters it. Then you have to regrind it down into grog, and then put it into clay again and bring it back eventually. So the fire makes it more permanent. Right now we're dealing with a material that's less permanent. Now the rim is uneven, so one solution to rims that are uneven, and you can notice these are a little bit flatter, is you cup the bowl, the pinch bowl that you made, and tap it on your table, and that'll flatten out the top, even it out a little bit, and it'll also give you more surface area for the next stage. Okay. The next step is going to be making a foot ring. We're going to learn how to use a fork and slip and how to put things together. If I just went along and shoved these together like this and started pushing them together, they might hold together. But most likely in the firing process, we're going to see them like this again because they're not homogeneous. I haven't worked them together until they're one piece. So slipping and scoring is our gluing agent. It's like other gluing agents that you've done, like collage, paper, glue onto a board to become permanent versus just water and paper, and then it'll just peel off. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this piece of clay, just squeeze it in my hand, and you can see my finger marks from squeezing it, and then I'm going to make a coil. So in a second I'll show you my hands, and you'll see which part of my hand I'm using. And I'm using what's called gravity feed coil making, and it's a very traditional process where I'm using gravity and I'm squeezing a little bit with my hand to make this rope of clay, which is our coil. There's other methods to make coils. This is the main method I use. And if you look, you can see the parts of my hand that are wetter. That's where I'm cupping and going in here, not my fingers as much, because the fingers will leave marks and then you won't be as even. So here's my ring. And if you make a coil like this and you end up with a section that's thinner, like right here, than the rest of it, just cut it there. The first easy solution to this. Once we make a coil, you just tap it on the table with your hand. Same thing, this part of my hand, the strong part of my hand. Then I'm going to take it, tap it, tap it. This thickens that edge again that I'm going to be using to attach it to one of these. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cut at a 45 and I'll show you what they look like in a second. So you can see that this 45 angle. So if I built a wall this way and attached it this way, this is what's holding it together. By having those 45-degree angles, I'm locking the two pieces of clay together. And that's what's going to be a lot stronger this way than this way for construction. So I'm going to take my fork and I'm going to score this piece. So what I'm doing is texturing it. You don't want to jab this way with the fork because you'll make air pockets. So there. Then I'm going to take my slip, my glue, and paint it into the carving, into the lines. And the other thing you want to make sure you use enough slip. Many times in a firing process, we'll find your pinch bowl with its first foot ring, and the foot ring will be separate from the bowl, and I'll still see your lines. And I can see where you put a little bit of slip, but not enough to adhere it. So it actually popped apart, and you can see where somebody painted the slip on it, but you can still see the score marks as the two pieces pop apart. So let's flip this guy over. And now I'm going to take my time rocking this. If you bend this all of a sudden, really, really fast, and if the clay is what we call short, you'll see cracks in it. So you want to wiggle it a little bit to stretch the plasticity of the clay. That way it doesn't crack on you. And if it does crack, like here, it cracked a little bit because this is a stoneware. So it has a lot of sand and grog, teeth, what we call tooth to it. We can still fix that. So what I'm doing is I'm going to finish this ring, and I'm going to texture or score my two 45-degree angles. I'm only going to paint one of them with slip. If you paint slip on both sides, it's too much and it slides around, and it takes a while for it to stick together. By painting it in one side and then pushing it together, then you work that seam. So you'll see my thumb going one way, then I work in another direction, and then another direction. And I usually work in 3 to 4 different directions on a seam. I will also use the rounded tools like this, and like I was mentioning, a popsicle stick works for this, to work the inside seam a little bit, just like that. Now the bottom, the part that I had already scored once, I'm going to score again. The reason I scored and slipped it once was to soften it. Now I'm going to do it a second time, now that it's a little bit softer. And I'm going to put it on my bowl, push down a little bit. And what that does, if you notice, I'm going to flip this 180. That marks where I need to score on my bowl. So here we go again, I'm scoring, creating that tooth. You can see there. Now I'm going to take the ring and put it on there. Now I'm going to tap it. Then I'm going to pick up the whole thing. First I'm going to wipe my hand on my blue towel. Actually I should use this one that's already emptied. And I'm going to start pushing this ring onto this bowl. So I'm working on making these two pieces into one whole piece. Then I'm going to work back. The bowl has a little extra clay there, so when I push down, that little bit of clay became a little bit of a lip, and now I'm working the two together. And you'll hear popping sounds. That's the air that's coming out of this as I'm working. And I'm going to work on the interior seam, the water and the clay that's in there. So now this bowl has a foot ring. And you're going to learn, I'm going to be showing lots about different foot rings, different ways to put things together to give height. And, you know, when you look at, let me fix the belly of this bowl a little bit. Okay. And I'm going to tap it a little bit to make sure it stays straight. When you look at the two bowls next to each other, the one with the ring, the one without, the ring gives this lift. It makes the piece have a little bit more of a presence. It's also teaching you how to hand build with slipping and scoring and putting things together towards our first major project. So this introduction is actually starting to give you the building blocks to all the components that you're going to need as you move towards the larger scale piece that we're going to do. Now, just because I put the foot ring on there doesn't mean I'm done. I'm going to pinch this bowl a little bit more. and look at the curve on the inside and use my thumb to smooth out the curve a little bit more. And I'm going to stop on this bowl right now and move it to the side. And later on, I'll do some more to it. But right now, that's done. This one, I'm actually just going to leave the way it is. And you're probably wondering, what are we going to do with these? These are going to be the first pieces that you're going to do testing of slips and glazes on. So if you end up making 2 to 4, like I'm doing here, that's good. If you do end up that you're really, really bored and you end up making 10 of them, it gives you, or more, I would say probably about, if you make 10, that's cool. If you make more than that, it's getting pretty extreme, but you already heard me mention that one time I made 300 of these. It just gives you more tests until you start making more wheel work. So once I'm practicing the wheel and I make pieces for glazing on the wheel, before I make the piece I'm really happy about and that I feel is really precious, I'll take one of these pinch bowls and test 3, 4 slips and glazes on it, and then that'll give me an idea. Or a piece of my sketchbook, I look at these as sketch pages in my notebook or in my artist notebook, and it'll give me an idea of how I want to finish the piece I really care about. So once this has gone closer to a leather hard stage, now you can do other things to it. This tool that I was using earlier, I can push into it and create a texture. Now wherever I push into the wall of the piece, my hand is on the inside across from it. That way I don't crush it. The textures I'm putting on this piece is because when we put the glaze on it, whichever glaze we pick, we're going to see how the glaze reacts to the textural surface versus a smooth surface. So now we have more of a texture that looks like a strawberry. Now you can find textures in lots of different places, or you can create textures based off of the tools that you bought in your little kit. This is a throwing tool normally, but I use it as a texture tool to create linear lines by tapping in a couple different spots. And this is what has attracted people to clay since the beginning of time, is you can leave a mark. Now I'm also going to take this little bottle brush top and push it in, and I'm not sure how well we'll see it in the video, but what it does is it creates a texture that looks like bone. Like if you've ever seen a dried out bone, you'll see the little cell texture or tree texture, so you can see that. You're going to want to make sure you sign these pieces. So your signature has to be somewhere on this, most likely right here. Make sure your full last name is on the foot here or in here, and just go and carve your name into it. You can use a needle, the needle tool from your toolkit. You want to identify your work because it all will start looking the same. And you want to make sure, if you follow the syllabus, you want your full name on here. That way we know whose it belongs to once it's fired. Now the other thing that happens when this fires, it's going to shrink anywhere from 8 to 10%. It's going to change color. And so you might not even realize it's yours anymore once it shrinks and it changes color. You will look at it and like, no, that's not mine. Then you'll pick it up, or I'll pick it up and check. And I go, no, that's your name on it. Once we get to this finish point, now what you want to do is make sure you put this on a board or a bat. And if you really want to work on it some more, make sure you use a moist towel. I usually use the shop towels because they don't break apart as fast as regular paper towels. Then put this all in a plastic bag sealed with the opening of the plastic bag underneath. That way it'll stay wet enough so you can continue working on it. But if you're done with it, then don't have to put the blue towel on it, but still put the plastic bag over it, just draped over it. That way it naturally dries slower than leaving it uncovered. Sometimes they'll crack if they dry too fast. So that's the end of the first stage of this exercise.